The year is 1704. You are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of miles away from any visible coastline. The sun is mercilessly scorching overhead. The smell of damp wood, melted tar, human sweat, and salty sea air fills every breath. Beneath your feet, oak planks creak rhythmically as the ship rises and falls on waves that seem as though they will never tire. You are not a passenger. You are part of the crew, and this ship sails under the flag of no king or empire. This vessel belongs to everyone, and no one, at the same time. Most people imagine a pirate ship as a place of pure chaos. Men shouting, orders enforced at sword point, a cruel captain ruling with an iron fist, and everyone else obeying out of fear. It is a powerful image, but it is almost entirely wrong, because the reality of how a pirate ship operated during the golden age of piracy, roughly between 1680 and 1730, is one of the most surprising and counterintuitive stories in history. And it all begins with a simple question. How did a group of men living outside the law, with no government, army, or courts, manage to maintain order, distribute wealth, and operate a complex machine that crossed entire oceans for months at a time? The answer may change the way you think, not only about piracy, but about human organization itself. It starts with the ship. If your image of a pirate vessel comes from movies, you probably imagine a massive galleon armed with dozens of cannons and enormous sails. The reality was different. Most pirates preferred smaller, faster, and more maneuverable ships. The most popular types were sloops and light frigates, vessels capable of quickly approaching merchant ships, changing direction with agility, and disappearing into shallow waters where naval warships could not follow. Speed was the key to survival. A slow pirate ship was often a doomed pirate ship. Yet even these relatively small vessels required extraordinary coordination to operate. Consider everything that had to function simultaneously. Sails constantly adjusted to changing winds. Ropes and pulleys kept under continuous tension. Manual pumps removing water from the hull. Supplies carefully stored and monitored. Navigation performed without modern instruments, relying only on stars, compasses, clocks, and calculations. These men were not fools. Many of them were among the most skilled sailors on the ocean. The worst sailors simply did not survive long enough to become pirates. The sea eliminated them quickly and without mercy. And this natural selection process produced something historians did not expect when they began studying surviving records from the period. What emerged was a surprisingly sophisticated system of governance, written, signed, and enforced with a seriousness that would embarrass many modern institutions. These documents were known as the ship's articles. Before a voyage began, every crew member was expected to agree to them. The articles established how the ship would operate, how treasure would be divided, which behaviors were forbidden, what punishments would be applied for violations, how decisions would be made, who possessed authority, and under what conditions that authority could be removed. Because yes, pirates could fire their captain. And this was not an exception. A pirate captain was elected by the crew and could be removed by majority vote. His absolute authority existed only in two situations. During battle, when hesitation could mean death. During severe storms, when every second mattered. Outside of those situations, the captain was not an absolute ruler, but merely an executive leader. He did not eat significantly better than everyone else. He did not sleep in luxurious private quarters, while the crew suffered below deck. On many documented ships, the captain received only a slightly larger share of the loot than ordinary sailors. The difference was surprisingly small. The person who often possessed the greatest day-to-day authority was the quartermaster. The quartermaster distributed work, settled disputes, protected the crew's interests, and ensured that supplies were distributed fairly. This position carried enormous practical responsibility. On many pirate ships, the quartermaster actually wielded more real power than the captain during periods when the ship was not engaged in combat. As historians began examining surviving records from the era, they discovered something unexpected: a surprisingly sophisticated system of governance, written, signed, and enforced with a seriousness that would put many modern institutions to shame. These agreements were known as the ship's articles. Before a vessel set sail, every crew member was required to accept them. The articles specified exactly how the ship would operate. They defined how treasure would be distributed, which behaviors were prohibited, what punishments would apply to violations, how decisions would be made, who possessed authority, and under what circumstances that authority could be revoked. Because yes, pirates could remove their captain. This was not an unusual exception, but a fundamental principle. A pirate captain was elected by the crew and could be removed by a majority vote of that same crew. The captain's absolute authority existed only in two situations: during battle, when hesitation could mean death, and during severe storms, when every second mattered. Outside these circumstances, the captain was not an absolute ruler, but merely an executive leader. He did not enjoy lavish meals while the crew starved. He did not sleep in luxurious quarters while everyone else suffered below deck. On many documented pirate ships, the captain received only a slightly larger share of the loot than an ordinary sailor. The difference was often surprisingly small. The individual who handled the daily operation of the ship was usually the quartermaster. He assigned duties, settled disputes, protected the interests of the crew, and ensured that provisions were distributed fairly. It was a position of immense practical responsibility. On many pirate ships, the quartermaster exercised more real power than the captain during periods when the ship was not engaged in combat. This raises an obvious question. How did these agreements actually work in practice? How did men living outside the law, with no external authority to appeal to, manage to enforce such arrangements? The answer lies in something stronger than any written law: the alignment of personal interest with collective interest. Every pirate aboard knew that his own prosperity depended directly upon the smooth functioning of the system. A sailor who stole from the common treasure before its official distribution was not merely breaking a rule. He was attacking the livelihood of every other crew member. Without police, courts, or prisons, punishment was often swift and carried out directly by the crew itself. This created an extremely effective system of mutual accountability. Everyone watched everyone else, not out of blind loyalty, but because maintaining the system benefited them personally. Surviving pirate codes, including those associated with the famous pirate Bartholomew Roberts, reveal fascinating details. Gambling with cards or dice for money was often forbidden aboard ship to prevent crew members from financially undermining one another before reaching their objective. Lights and candles were frequently required to be extinguished by 8 o'clock in the evening. Those wishing to continue drinking afterward were expected to do so on the open deck rather than in enclosed quarters, where carelessness could set the entire ship ablaze. Fighting among crew members was generally prohibited. If two men had a dispute, they were often required to settle it on land under agreed-upon rules and in the presence of witnesses. Even violence had procedures. Remarkably, pirate crews also maintained an early form of social insurance centuries before modern welfare systems existed. If a crew member lost a limb in battle, he was entitled to compensation according to a predetermined scale specified in the articles. The loss of a right arm might command a larger payment than the loss of a left arm. Losing an eye carried its own fixed compensation. These payments provided injured sailors with resources that could allow them to survive and live with a degree of comfort once they returned ashore. It was a primitive but surprisingly effective disability and life insurance system created by men who lacked formal education but understood risk extremely well. Consider the contrast. While pirate crews operated under written constitutions and voting systems, sailors serving in the British Royal Navy often lived under radically different conditions. Many had been forcibly impressed into service, effectively kidnapped from ports, and compelled to serve once they found themselves at sea. They received miserable wages that were frequently delayed for months. Minor infractions could result in brutal public punishments. They had little or no voice in decision-making, and received no meaningful share of captured wealth. In practical terms, they were often treated as temporary property of the crown. This reality helps explain why pirate crews recruited so successfully. Many men did not choose piracy because they were inherently criminal or lawless. In many cases, the legal alternative was simply worse. Joining a pirate crew often meant gaining a voice in governance, receiving protection, sharing in profits, and enjoying a level of dignity unavailable within official institutions. Now let us return below deck, where the true complexity of shipboard life becomes apparent. Imagine the hold of a pirate ship. It was dark, damp, and suffocatingly hot in tropical waters, while becoming freezing cold in the North Atlantic. The smell was overwhelming to anyone unaccustomed to it. Water stored in wooden barrels often began deteriorating after weeks at sea. Hard biscuits became infested with insects. Rats were constant companions. Interestingly, sailors did not always regard rats as entirely unwelcome. Experienced seamen knew that rats abandoning a ship in large numbers could indicate that the vessel was taking on water and might soon sink. Food represented one of the greatest logistical challenges of any long voyage. Without refrigeration, provisions deteriorated steadily. During the first days, sailors might enjoy fresh bread and quality meat. Weeks later, they survived on hard biscuits and heavily salted meat. After a month, fresh fruits and vegetables were often exhausted, creating conditions for scurvy to emerge. The symptoms were horrifying bleeding gums, loose teeth, physical weakness, and the sensation that the body itself was slowly falling apart. Pirates operating among island chains possessed a significant advantage over vessels undertaking long ocean crossings. They could replenish supplies more frequently, obtain tropical fruits, secure fresh water, and reduce the time spent under the worst nutritional conditions. The ship's cook occupied a unique social position aboard. Often older or physically disabled, he was one of the few crew members who did not regularly participate in combat. It was not uncommon for the cook to be a sailor who had lost a limb in an earlier battle, but remained valuable enough to continue serving and receiving a share of the profits. A good cook was more than a convenience. He was a survival asset. Well-fed crews worked more efficiently, fought less frequently, and suffered fewer illnesses. And illness represented a far greater threat than enemy cannon fire. Modern historical studies suggest that for every sailor killed in combat during this period, several more died from disease. Yellow fever, dysentery, scurvy, and infected wounds claimed countless lives. In many respects, a ship was an environment of extraordinary biological risk. If a ship carried a surgeon at all, he often worked with tools that would horrify modern medical professionals. Amputations were performed without anesthesia. Heated irons were used to cauterize wounds. Treatments frequently relied on little more than rum, tar, and hope. Yet despite these challenges, food management, disease control, navigation, combat readiness, treasure distribution, and ship maintenance, the entire operation somehow functioned. And this brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of piracy. A pirate ship was, above all else, an intelligence-gathering machine. Pirates did not simply wander the oceans hoping to encounter valuable targets by chance. Doing so would have been financially disastrous. Instead, they relied upon sophisticated information networks, neutral ports, remote island taverns, corrupt merchants willing to exchange information for a share of profits, and countless informal contacts formed an extensive intelligence web. Through these channels, pirates learned about trade routes, valuable cargoes, departure schedules, and strategic choke points through which merchant vessels were forced to pass. When pirates captured a ship, their first priority was often not the cargo itself. It was information. Captains and crew members were questioned extensively. Which ships had they seen recently? Where were those ships headed? What were they carrying? What routes were they following? This intelligence could prove more valuable than the captured cargo itself. Accurate information might lead directly to a treasure-laden vessel carrying Spanish silver. Poor intelligence or navigational mistakes could condemn a crew to weeks of wasted sailing, depleted supplies, increased wear on the ship, and declining morale. And morale was perhaps the most valuable resource aboard. A crew with low morale was more likely to vote out its captain, suffer internal divisions, and make poor decisions at critical moments. Experienced captains understood this. Maintaining morale was as important as maintaining the hull itself. Musicians aboard ship were not a luxury. They were an investment. Alcohol distributed at the right moments was not necessarily a weakness but a management tool. Stories told beneath the stars after nightfall helped create a shared identity among men from different backgrounds, languages, and cultures. This was leadership every bit as real as commanding a battle. Yet we must also be honest about something often omitted from romanticized pirate narratives. This was an extraordinarily dangerous life. The average career of an active pirate during the Golden Age was brutally short. Many of history's most famous pirates were captured, killed in battle, died of disease, or vanished from historical records within only a few years of beginning their careers. Bartholomew Roberts, often regarded as one of the most successful pirates in history, captured more than 400 vessels before being killed in battle in 1722, at the age of 40%. Even reaching that age was remarkable given the dangers he faced continuously. Most of his crew died much younger. Freedom carried a price, and that price was often collected with interest. Those who survived long enough to accumulate wealth faced another challenge. Where could they spend it? Legitimate ports often sought to arrest or execute them. Imperial authorities hunted them relentlessly. Pirate havens such as Nassau, in the Bahamas, Tortuga in the Caribbean, and parts of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean provided temporary refuge but never permanent security. Money earned through months of hardship was frequently spent within days ashore, not because pirates were necessarily irresponsible, but because preserving wealth without legal protection, secure banking, or recognized property rights was extremely difficult. When tomorrow is uncertain, people naturally focus on today, and it is precisely this tension between human ingenuity and the harsh realities of existence that makes the story of pirate ships so fascinating. Because what these men built in the middle of the ocean, without a state, without formal legal institutions, and without any external safety net, was ultimately an attempt to solve a universal human problem. How do individuals with personal interests create systems that work for everyone? How can power be distributed without becoming corrupt? How can cooperation survive in an environment constantly pushing toward chaos? Pirates did not solve these problems perfectly. Their world contained violence, exploitation, and injustice, particularly toward prisoners and the populations they preyed upon. Those darker aspects cannot and should not be ignored or romanticized. Yet within the boundaries of their own crews, among the men who signed those articles, there existed a system born not from philosophers or statesmen but from practical necessity. It was created by people forced by circumstance to determine what truly mattered for survival. The enduring lesson is not that pirates were heroes. It is that intelligence, innovation, and effective organization are not the exclusive property of any class, nation, or era. They emerge when experience accumulates, when knowledge is shared, and when individual interests are aligned with collective goals. Under those conditions, human beings can build remarkable systems, even in the middle of an ocean, beyond the reach of law, with nothing but wind, wood, and shared determination. The next time you see a skull and crossbones flag on a screen or costume, remember what stood behind that symbol. Signed agreements, elected leaders, compensation systems, and a rough form of democracy sailing through waters that no empire could completely control. For a brief moment in history, some men took those ideas very seriously. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Everything is on record.